Hello, welcome to Gun Insights, sponsored by RGS. I'm Paul, and we're joined here today with Mike, and we're going to talk about Ballard Rifles, why you would want one, what makes them awesome, what makes them great, why you want to shoot one or not shoot one, or even why some people think that might not be the greatest rifle ever. But either way, we're going to talk about that. We're not going to get so much into the exact details of dates of manufacture, who manufactured what, and all that. Pretty much, we're going to basically talk about just basically why we like them, why we shoot them, their relevance in history, and why for target, especially Schuetzen and target shooters have gravitated towards them, I guess, more than most other rifles. So that's basically what we're going to talk about today. It's just going to be that. A real quick history on it, and I cannot remember all the details, so I had to take some notes. But the Ballard was essentially designed and came to market in 1861 by Charles Ballard, who was from Ball and Williams. Now, at that point, they were all rimfires, those early rifles, and I had shot some of them, and they're kind of unique. They're really not the Ballard that we know of and think of today. I don't know. Have you ever played around with any of those early hand eject models?
No, nothing by way of super early hand eject models. I think they're as interesting as all the later ones, but you just simply don't see them as often. And since we're having this discussion in terms of something that an individual might want to be able to actually buy and shoot, I think a lot of those early rimfire ones are probably not the ticket for that. So to speak.
Totally.
So,
Agreed. The early rimfires were in calibers 38, 44, 46, 56, 56 Spencers, all rimfires. Now, these were out by the Civil War. And I know Kentucky was one of the states that had
the state of Kentucky.
Yep, that had a big thing. Now, also, we were talking about this once before, was the dual ignition system on these things.
Yes.
I guess that was at the period where they could pop a hole in the base of it. There was a percussion, a nipple on the bottom of the block that it would, so all that. So anyway, from that very basic beginning, and we can circle back to all of that stuff, they, from the Ball and Williams, they then went to Merrimack. From Merrimack, Brown had them. And then Shuverling and Daly. And that's basically the heyday of the Marlin, which was from 1875 to 1891, which in reality, when you think about it, is a very short time that all of these things were made and used.
It was. It was.
Not a very, in comparison to a lot of firearms, modern firearms, that is a tiny manufacturing window. But there's so much was in flux at that time.
Now, would you say, since we're primarily looking at your collection here, in your opinion, the later Marlin manufactured, were those the best manufactured rifles out of all those manufacturers, or were some of the earlier manufacturers just as good in terms of quality? Maybe their options weren't there or something like that, but
I don't have a whole lot of experience with the early ones. I do know for a fact that you'll see by the time Marlin started making them, and the guns that we know today, meaning they have, the standard extraction, ejection, whatever you want to call it, and all of that stuff. You'll see, and like, again, I am not an expert on those little fine details of those generations of guns, but you will see parts in the Marlins from the older manufacturers. There was definitely some using of other parts and all that stuff. They like everything, they used up what they had. So I don't think that from a manufacturing standpoint, they were any lesser of a firearm. I think that predominantly you're talking about rim fires compared to by the time the center fire basically dominated and came over with, the cartridges and all that stuff. I think that's pretty much when you get into the whole Marlin thing, and into the forged actions. And we're definitely going to be talking about forged and cast on that. But
So before we discuss, I think which is something that's always brought up between the forged and cast action Ballards, Marlin produced quite a variety of models, correct?
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So just on a quick list here, we have the number ones, the number twos, the number threes. The number ones, hunter models. By the time Marlin came along, some of those I think were starting to be phased out, like the 1.5s. Those were like bigger 1 3/4. Those were like bigger, heavy center fire rifles and stuff like that. Okay. The number 2 sporting models were mostly the rim fires, okay. Like the 32s, the 38s. They had the reversible firing pins on them. Those were all cast action guns. Okay. And then just kind of going through some of the models. Now, there were center fires made on cast actions. 4440 on number 2s. Then you had the number 3. And the number 3 is usually the rimfire model, like it has the concave top.
So like a gallery model.
Yep, gallery models. Okay. Now those actions are definitely different than the other cast actions because they had a different extractor system and there was a lot more meat taken out of the inside. And I'll get some pictures I'll throw up on the screen that will show, kind of the differences between them and all of that stuff. Okay. Then you move into the number 4, and I think that is this guy right here, this one. Okay. Is this your standard number 4? They call the perfection model. Then you moved into the number 5, which is this one here. And then the 6s and the 6.5s. And then I have some 8s and 9s. I don't have any 7s, which are you're getting into the mid-range. So
If I could just stop you for a second, what is significant as I look at these different models on the table? There's of course a couple of things that stand out. They're all beautiful vintage firearms, but this number 5 right here, what does this have that you're not going to find in the other models? And because as I look at it here, if I'm pretty inexperienced with looking at these, I see what looks like a ramrod underneath. Clearly it's not a ramrod because these are breech loading firearms, but I don't know if you could maybe elaborate on that for those that are unfamiliar with that model.
Yep. So basically on this guy here, and it might be stuck a little bit, it's a wiping rod essentially. Okay. Unless they were using a dual ignition system, but I've never seen it on that. So no, I think it was basically just for wiping. The 4 Perfection was their heavier forged firearm with double set triggers. So now I would say this rifle here, this very specific model, is probably one of the more rare because of the set trigger. Okay. I think it got, not that they were rare, I think they made a ton of them. I think they all got cannibalized to make Schuetzen rifle. If you couldn't afford a number 6, you laid your hands on a number 5 because you had the double set trigger mechanism, and you could build your Schuetzen rifle off of it rather than buying a dedicated Schuetzen rifle, because these were expensive. I mean, the engraving, and we can show some of that and all that, but just being your basic rifle, I think these things were snatched up an awful lot, way more than your standard 4, simply because the 4 just had a single trigger on it. So everybody wants the double set. And we'll circle back to triggers and what makes triggers good or not good and all of that stuff.
So if I'm to understand correctly, there was a considerable price difference between these models, the specific Schuetzen models, the number 5s and the number 4s. And would I assume correctly that probably the number 2 sporting were some of the less expensive models? I don't want to use the term cheap because I don't believe any of them were cheap. But from a standard sporting rifle, say a deer hunter or even small game hunter, would that have been the route that they'd have taken?
More than likely,
number 2 as opposed to a 4 or 5.
If you're just using it to put meat on the table, why would you have a you know, like the 6.5, you know, mid-range with the, you know, all of the engraving. Why would you have, you know, you wouldn't go through the effort of having something like that.
That's quite the fancy. That's quite the fancy piece
for just the simple utility grade firearm. So yeah, definitely, I think. But the pricing, you know, there's another friend of mine. His name is Jim, who actually a lot of these things came from. He's out on the East Coast, which still, I think, has a lot better source of rifles than the Midwest.
Fair.
I think there's just so many more that are still out there today. So a lot of these came from the East Coast. Okay. But we were talking about, you know, the pricing, you know, between cast action guns and forged rifles and all that. And I just can't remember all those nuanced details, but it's
an endless debate.
It is. But the pricing, oddly enough, we were discussing the pricing, and I don't think Marlin or Ballard Marlin ever looked at it as the cast action was a weaker or less desirable action, because the price differences between like some of the plain number 2s and some of the more plain like the 4s and stuff like that. A cast action compared to a forged action, the price difference wasn't that great. So it's kind of my opinion. I don't think Marlin ever viewed the cast action as being, and we kind of got off topic, but I don't think the cast action was ever viewed as being like a cheaper action than the forged. It was just an alternative. As to why they did it may have been just due to manufacturing.
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up, because I know there are other videos and we all love, you know, various firearm forums and things like that. And one thing I know in terms of the cast action that's been brought up is, as you touched on it, we know it was chambered in the 4440. For not too great a length of time. I don't know if it was only several years or less, and the general consensus seems to be that Marlin determined that at that point, this is the general consensus. Now, I'm not saying this is specific here, but it seems to be that as production went on with those 4440s, it was determined the cast action was not capable of handling what the 4440 produced in terms of pressure and breech thrust and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if I agree with that so much as I agree with your statement about Marlin not deeming one stronger than the other. But maybe it's just a question of economics, or a result of certain economics. Maybe the 4440 just did not sell well in that sporting model, which is what caused Marlin to discontinue it. Perhaps it had nothing to do with being strong or weak. It was just simply sales.
So I think the cast, I think was from a manufacturing cost, they were on less embellished firearms. So I think it's definitely more cost effective to use the cast rather than a forge, just because there's less steps in manufacturing. That being said, once you start getting it, they still use the cast on like the 3 fine gallery guns. Which if they thought they were inferior, why would they have ever, put them on engraved gallery models, even though they were rimfire?
That's an interesting point.
Going back, to that, as far as the strength and all that, I'll bring up my friend Jim again, and we're talking about, I'll shout out to Jim Rowe for, he's got an extensive collection of Ballards over the years and all that, but he helped catalog a collection of Ballards, and in there was definitely a completely factory marked, all the serial numbers on all the parts and all that, was a 3240 on a cast action. Marlin at one point obviously thought it was
strong enough.
It was strong enough for a 3240, at least. Now that's not the norm. It's kind of an outlier on that. But as far as, the cast, for me, well, you have some cast action Ballards you shoot. Do you ever feel like you have a hand grenade in your hand?
I do. Never once. And again, I mean, just, I have to preface that everybody's opinion on this varies, and I guess what one individual is willing to put their face behind in comparison to another one, that will always be up to the individual shooter. But I have never had any fear of shooting a cast Ballard in a 32-40, or for that matter, even a 38-55. Having said that, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I'm not certain I would go a whole lot bigger than, say, a 38-55. In a cast action. I think that's about its limit. But I've never felt unsafe in any way shooting sane loads from either one of those cast Ballards.
No, I think you got a good point there. 32, 40, 38, 55. I think, the pressures are pretty close on both of them. There's not much of a difference. And we had talked about this once before about nobody, so like, what are some of the contemporaries of its day, right? So you had, the rolling block, which was a very powerful action.
Sure.
But as far as smokeless loads for contemporaries in the day, the trapdoor Springfield, there's not a lot here holding back anything, and nobody ever thinks twice about loading 45-70 smokeless loads in these things. Load data is everywhere. Mm-hmm. I mean, and here's just a junky Ballard action that's getting, in the process of getting worked on. So, I mean, I don't know, pound for pound, meat. I don't really see a whole lot of difference. That's my take on it as well. And a lot of people might not be comfortable shooting smokeless out of a cast. I don't know. I have plenty of times, but I think it needs to be, also looked upon that, as you had said, sane loads. If I highly would not recommend using jacketed bullets that are going to jump your pressure up. You're talking target loads, low pressure target loads with soft lead bullets.
Sure.
I think the cast action would hold up just perfectly fine for that, and has. I've shot one in a 32-40 an awful lot. I've never had any problems with it. But then again, it's up to the shooters to whether or not, is the forged really that much stronger? I don't know.
Well, having said that, say a guy wanted to go out and find one of these for purchase, and maybe he decided he did want a forged frame as opposed to a cast. Could you give us a quick rundown in terms of what somebody might want to look for to determine the difference between a forged and a cast action? Now, I've read plenty of times. I don't know if we can get that. We can get that in the picture. The address on the side of the frame here. The 2-line addresses are I think traditionally known to be forged frames, and the 3 lines are typically cast. I know that's not a hard and fast rule, because there were some cast frames that did have a 2-line address. However, it's a decent guideline. It's a decent guideline to follow. But in this day and age, I mean, all of these rifles are well in excess of 100 years old. If those markings are gone, what's the best way for a guy to look at one of those actions or rifles and determine if it's a forged or a cast?
I'll get some pictures so people can see it. But internally, when you look at the gun internally, you can see the cast. You can see the casting marks,
you can see
from the
sand casting imperfections, if you will, or
the
not,
roughness
not
of the mold, the sand mold. It takes shape to that, so you will see that on the inside of the Ballard action is scalloped out, and I'll get some pictures of it on there. It's real smooth on forged actions, and it's kind of roughed like a casting on the cast action. So number one. 2, you really got to figure out if you want double set triggers or single triggers, and you'll see double sets on cast as well as you will on forged. So, if you're doing Well, it depends on the kind of shooting, right? If you're going to do bench work and all that stuff, you can take a single trigger and get it pretty good. If you're going to do really fine target offhand work, almost nobody wants a single trigger. Most guys, for the few shoots and shooters that are still left shooting that discipline, are all going to want double triggers, double sets. So just basically going through looking at the extractor, like I said, the number 3s with the concave tops of the receivers, all cast. They have a different extractor system rather than the traditional like lever style. It's a plunger. So there's more material removed in there. A lot of times probably find something that's been converted. Wildcat, conversions were really popular back in the day. You'd see them in those crazy caliber conversions, but a lot of times they would use cast actions on those as well, which maybe is where some of that stuff came from, with cast actions being dangerous. But anyway, open up that whole debate once again on it. But anyway,
so is there any having said that in terms of them being dangerous or not, and I think we get to the age old debate of black powder versus smokeless powder in these old rifles. And admittedly, that probably could be a video unto itself. It's been talked about a lot. There's plenty of guys can find plenty of YouTube videos on tests and pressure curves and all this kind of stuff. I am just curious as to what your take on it is. My personal take is there's plenty of smokeless load data out there that will keep peak pressures low enough in these old rifles where I would be just fine using them that way. Now, there are other guys out there I know that are diehard black powder shooters, and more power to them. More power to them. That's what I say. But I'm just curious as to what your take and what you personally do.
Well, I have a strong opinion. I do not like black powder and cartridge.
Yes.
I don't like it. I don't like it. It's stinky to shoot reduced charges. You have to put meal in there, farina or something, and it smells like you're cooking hair every time you touch off a shot. I just don't. I prefer. That being said, a lot of the shooting that I've done over the years was Schuetzen shooting. There's nobody shooting target rifles with black powder anymore. That hasn't been done in well over a century. As soon as smokeless came out, duplexing was a big thing, and just going, all the way to smokeless. So if black powder cartridge is a whole shooting discipline unto itself, I don't get into it. And I think people probably are using some of the Ballards to do black powder cartridge, and that's cool enough and all. But, it's for me, I only shoot smokeless.
Okay.
I just don't, I don't like taking a Schuetzen, like this is a number 6 Schuetzen. This one's got a little bit of a loose lever on it, but I don't like taking a Schuetzen, a number 6, shooting black powder out of it, or even my old Sharps rifles. I don't like taking them out and then having to scrub black powder out of them. That's just me. It's just, you have your optics on here and you have all this stuff going on.
Sure.
To take it and shoot black powder. And I know there's a lot of people that say, oh, it's not that big a deal. Just, it cleans up easy with water. You don't need to go all that crazy with it. And they're probably right. But since I can get everything I want out of smokeless charges, why would I shoot black powder? I just, there's just no benefit for the style of shooting that I do.
Okay. So it's light or conservative charges of smokeless powder all the way for you.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the old, like this rifle here, this is my dad's Schuetzen rifle. He's shot this for decades.
Okay. So that's that rifle has seen plenty of competition in its lifetime.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Now, and I know for him, he likes out of this rifle.
Now is that a 3240 or is that
it's a 3240?
Okay, that is a 3240.
Yep. Number 6, 3240. So I know for him, he likes the way he set it up. He likes a little bit lesser magnification on the scope.
Okay.
I generally like huge those big things with higher power, but I kind of got used to shooting it.
The 20 or even 30,
15s,
18s,
20s.
okay.
Yeah.
Show you how much you shake. Not saying that you shake. I just
no, it does, but you got to get used to it. But once you're used to it, it's not bad. But like I know he shot like about 150-ish grain bullet and blue dot. I think he was somewhere, and I could be wrong. I think he was somewhere around 10, 11 grains of blue dot.
Okay.
On this rifle.
Okay. So velocity wise, that was giving you
you're probably just
12 to 1400 feet a second.
You're coming out of there really light.
Okay.
Now interesting one thing, the number 6, and I don't want to get into it. Oh, this video could take hours if we went through all the little details of every one.
Right.
But the number 6, as far as I know, the number 6 was the one that had this flat bottom on the Swiss.
Okay.
Okay. And you see on early Ballards a lot of English walnut.
See that, yeah.
So
it's fantastic looking wood.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yep.
Now, what was the purpose for the flat bottom? Was that specifically to distinguish it from other models? Was it just just for aesthetics, or was there actually a purpose in terms of Schuetzen type competition?
I don't know of a purpose for it.
Okay.
Off the top of my hand, but the 6.5.
Okay.
As you can see, has a completely different butt plate.
Sure.
Now this one had like a big Malcolm on it. I don't have it on there right now because I was using the open sights, but this one had, it was either a Seidel or Malcolm, but a vintage, one of those nickel, really long scopes from back in the day.
Okay.
Which is why you see the dovetails on here. But, just a completely different, style. And that's from a 6 to 6.5, single trigger, checkered lever loop, not the spur.
Okay.
So, just a different style rifle.
So that might be referred to as more specifically an offhand rifle, as opposed to, say, like a dedicated Schuetzen type rifle with the loop and the spur for your fingers and thumbs and all that kind of stuff.
So, on almost all Schuetzens, you'll always notice that you have a ferrule there for your palm rest. So, you have your finger loop in here, however you want to hold it, and then your palm rest here. So we can do a whole separate video on Schuetzen. Maybe someone would like to see that.
Yeah.
On how to shoot vintage Schuetzen with a mechanical breech seater and the tools that you use to shoot and how you set your guns up and all that stuff. So
actually, that's a great idea. If we could just say, if anybody would like to see a video done up specifically about the Schuetzen competition or Schuetzen rifles specifically, maybe they could leave a comment or something like that, so we know how much interest there is in it, and then do another video on that.
Yeah. It's hard to find anybody that wants to shoot Schuetzen anymore, so let alone knows, knowing what it is, let alone shooting it. It is kind of obscure. So
it is, and it's like you've said several times. Talking about these old rifles. I mean, you could pick any one topic or any one rifle specifically and probably fill up, a day's worth of videos or even more talking about that one specific topic. They're really fantastic. And on the topic of Schuetzen, I feel like with me just kind of more or less learning about that, over the course of just the past couple of years, it really kind of opened my eyes to a lot of these rifles. As of but a couple of years ago, I was not particularly familiar with these Ballards, so I kind of credit an interest in Schuetzen shooting to developing very much an appreciation for these Ballard rifles. That's not to take away from anything else, but like I said, I really have developed a unique appreciation for these rifles specifically. So,
well, they definitely do the job, and like a lot of these have original barrels on them that are in excellent condition, and they shoot extremely well yet by today's standards. And
so these will shoot right alongside a fair amount of new production rifles today, you would say.
A lot of people are very dismissive of this old technology and all that stuff. But man, when you start talking, especially like 600 yards, you'd be surprised at. And the black powder cartridge guys, now, even though I don't like black powder in it, they're very good at having very consistent, good grouping at distance with black powder.
Sure.
And, all of those guys will be able to testify that, don't write one out. You can take your Model 700s or whatever bolt action rifles. And now I'm not saying that these things are every bit as powerful and good as a modern rifle with a scope on it. I mean, but for something that's a century and a half almost mismatched, how good you can get at 600 yards with these things and the accuracy you can get and the targets you can, there's nothing to, sneeze at.
Yeah.
And even shooting, taking something like this and shooting at 300, or 200 yards offhand, doing Schuetzen and being able to turn in a target that's in, like a 220 something, 230 something. I mean, that's never really going outside the 22 ring offhand at 200 yards. So if these guns were inaccurate, you could never do that.
Okay. And the 22 ring is how big, just for a point of reference?
I don't know exactly.
Okay.
This is terrible. I should know. I knew all this stuff more so at one time. I think the bull is 1.5 inches and each ring is 3/4 of an inch.
Okay.
So,
okay.
I'll show a target.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll put up a target and show it. So, good. There's a lot of guys that can easily do that with these rifles and better, it's, that's,
well, how much can a guy, if a guy wanted to purchase, we've kind of hashed out some differences between the forged actions and the cast actions. And if a guy was looking to purchase one of those, your recommendation was first determine what type of shooting he was looking at doing, and then kind of start to look at one of the models from there.
Yeah, caliber. How much power are you going to put on the action? Are you going to make a rim fire? Are you going to use like a 44-40, 38-40? You can get away with a cast action.
Okay.
Are you going to want, 45-70 or 40-70 sharps, or maybe 40-63?
Probably.
You probably want to gravitate towards the forged action.
Okay.
Would be I'm comfortable with 32-40s and stuff on cast, but not, by the time I want to get into a 40,
a forged frame might be a better choice for something like
definitely.
that.
I would suggest.
Okay. Well, how much could a guy then expect to pay if they were dead set on purchasing one of these that they didn't say have to rebarrel or something, a shootable, a decent condition, shootable specimen, the way it is in their choice of caliber, what they can find rather. How much can they expect to pay? Now, off the top of my head, I would have to assume those factory Schuetzens are up there in price. Is that something that's going to be within the reach of your average shooter, or should they maybe looking at a different model? Just given the price.
It's like everything in life. If you're gonna, if you're gonna step into it and buy it, your initial investment is going to be higher, but then you're not going to have to do a lot of work on the back end.
Okay.
So it's pretty easy, I think, in today's climate to be able to find a Schuetzen maybe that's been rebarreled with a new barrel, and has a good barrel on it. What you're going to be able to, what you're going to pay. Depending on the gun, depending on condition and all that, I'm going to say, I don't know. I don't really follow the prices of these things all that much because I really don't buy and sell them. I generally get them and then they go into a safe and out to the range. And but I think, kind of going by today's standards and comparisons on what I know, say you can find a decent number 6 with a barrel on it. A couple thousand, 2,500, somewhere in there.
Okay.
2,000, 2,500. Maybe you could find an old number 4. Single triggers aren't terrible. If you wanted to get into it, you could start with a number 4. It's got a good strong. Now, obviously, I'm going to recommend don't go out, buy a nice condition rifle and then cannibalize it to make a Schuetzen rifle. If that's what you want to do, fine, it's your money. But, you would be taking a decent rifle otherwise out of, collectors, hands. But, I think there's still a lot available out there that have been wildcatted or turned into something else where you can get the actions on it, and you can get the stock, you can put it together if you want to do that. Some guys are good with building a rifle. Some guys absolutely want nothing to do with it, but but like everything, unfortunately, the single shot and the Schuetzen game is expensive, and to get into it and be competitive at it, it's not the cheapest sport.
Sure.
Trap shooting is much cheaper.
Yeah. So I would have to agree with you, but at the same time, yeah, like you said, for a guy who's looking to get into that type of shooting competition, I'm thinking the old buy once, cry once adage, it probably is no more fitting than in a situation like that.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. And it's not just Ballards. I mean, I know we're talking about Ballards today, but there's 44 and a half Stevens, and there's the high wall Winchester. Out of all of them, since we're talking Schuetzen, and I think we need to do a separate Schuetzen video, but I will just say this. Okay. I think out of all the rifles for Schuetzen, your best rifles are going to be the Ballard and the Stevens 44 and a half. And it just basically comes down to the triggers. They're so much better than the competition. They had excellent triggers. Even by today's standards, they're double sets.
Okay.
Even their single sets aren't bad, or their single triggers, target triggers, like on that Rigby and the Union Hills on the end there and stuff like that. They were very, they're very good.
Okay.
So,
okay.
But
that's a good piece of information. And so, but again, to recap, I mean, that's a lot of what we've covered is a lot of information in a short period of time. I think with a brief history, a quick cast versus forged, and what you might want to use each one for, a couple of various calibers, specifically the two Schuetzen, and then a couple of rimfire calibers, and then of course the debate between black powder and smokeless. And I just want to say one more thing about the black powder and smokeless. That's no way designed to offend anybody who feels like these old rifles should only be shot with black powder, because that is the time frame they were designed in. So it's worth putting that out there and noting that we understand where those guys and that school of thought are coming from, and yeah, I just want to make it known that, we understand there are people that will continue to do that until the end of time, probably.
Was that a debate about whether you should be shooting smokeless or black?
Yes, in a firearm of this particular vintage, and you kind of touched on it with the trap doors and the rolling blocks and even the sharps, which guys use original versions of those rifles and shoot both a combination of black and or smokeless powder in those rifles. So for the guys, I just wanted to say, for the guys that aren't nothing but black powder shooters, hey, more power to you, and we understand why you choose to do it in difference to the age of these old rifles. Having said that, I think I will stick to my light smokeless loads in these same rifles and continue to enjoy them that way.
And you don't have to clean cases.
Yeah, that's true. Another video altogether where you could talk about case prep and cleaning when it comes to shooting black powder cartridge.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Awesome.
Right.
All right, there we go. So Ballard, why you want one, why you maybe don't want one, all of that, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there you go. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching. That thing kicked in, which means it's cold in here.